In the prior video, the conclusive evidence is that doctors were the most characteristic profession of the Nazi regime. A further examination of the personality traits of doctors through history and the profession's evolution before the professionalism of our scientific civilization is even more revealing. Although medicine and those practicing it have radically changed in comparison to primitive cultures, much of the practices and social perception of doctors still have strong commonalities with the practice of medicine in tribal eras. For instance, the patient and doctor relationship. By examining the anthropological history of doctors, we can better understand why doctors joined and supported Hitler's Germany at such an extent and what their social influence was in Nazi Germany. What were doctors before the Renaissance, prior to scientific medicine within modern culture? The closest terms we have to describe doctors in primitive tribes are medicine men or shamans. They were healers of the tribe, typically holding the highest social positions alongside the chief or leader of the tribe. Their goals were chiefly synonymous with those of modern-day doctors, to promote healing and alleviate suffering. Henry Ellenberger, a medical historian and father of the history of psychiatry, reveals how the original practices of medicine used psychology chiefly as a method of healing, tricking their patients and primitive doctors really believing themselves in what we would call fake medicine. This theory maintains that disease is caused by the presence in the body of a harmful foreign substance, such as a piece of bone, a pebble, a splinter of wood, or a small animal. Certain peoples believe that disease is caused not by the object itself, but by a special disease essence contained in the object. Sometimes the harmful disease object is believed to have been shot into the body by a sorcerer. This disease theory is widespread in America, excepting the Eastern Eskimos, very common in Eastern Siberia, Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and in several other parts of the world. It has also left many traces in European popular medicine and folklore. A striking fact is the connection between the disease theory and a peculiar kind of treatment. The medicine man uses his mouth to suck out the disease object. It is obvious that the disease object, seemingly extracted by the medicine man, is produced by means of a trick, which explains why some Europeans who watched such healing procedures declared that the medicine men were quacks and impostors. Yet, there is little doubt that these cures are often successful. It has also been pointed out that among certain populations, the disease object is of such a nature that a patient could not possibly believe that it had been extracted from his body. We face here a situation that frequently occurs in anthropology. In order to understand the meaning of a custom or belief, one must consider it within the sociological structure of the community. Similarly, we cannot understand this kind of therapy without knowing the natives' attitudes and beliefs in regard to the disease, the medicine man, and the treatment. Since modern civilization evolved from primitive tribal cultures, so did medicine and the psychological beliefs surrounding it. Here we reveal perhaps the original placebo effect, the strong relationship between the patient's belief in the techniques of the shaman or medicine man and a corresponding healing effect. This is largely achieved by the authority of the doctor over the patient, and the patient must trust and believe the doctor, and the doctor must believe his cure works, or at least behave like his cure works. When we examine the key themes promoted by Nazi propaganda, we find that much of it is predicated on the alleviation of suffering and promotion of health of the German people through the extermination of other infectious and diseased human beings. This clearly coincides with the removal of the diseased or infecting object in the typical techniques of primitive medicine men. It was the belief of Nazi Germans that the Jews and other groups were making them sick, and by removing them, they would be cured. Germany's euthanasia program was also propagated through health-promoting propaganda as a kind of medicine for the German people by exterminating the sick and deficient. Given the anthropological history of medicine, we come to the conclusion that the German people really felt their suffering was alleviated by the destruction of so-called diseased people, akin to typical primitive medical psychological tricks, the removal of disease objects. As Hermann Göring wrote, the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany, "The only motive which guided me was my ardent love for my people, its happiness, its freedom, and its life. And for this I call on the Almighty and my German people to witness." Hitler himself wrote in 1942, "We shall regain our health only by eliminating the Jew." The role doctors naturally find themselves in relationship to their patients is fundamentally to remove suffering and promote health. Dr. Dietrich Amanda, a well-established early Nazi physician, even described Hitler as the great physician of his people. Dr. Gerhard Wagner, chief of health in the Nazi Germany Party between 1934 and 1939, as well as various Nazi physician organizations, used naturopathic forms of medicine termed New German Healing, which was spread throughout the medical institutions. These naturopathic forms of medicine are natural kinds of medicine, not typically having a scientific basis. Many of these medical techniques used by the Germans were also commonplace in primitive tribes, including herbal medicines, for which Germany had the largest herbal medicine garden at the time of their Nazi reign. In general, there was an obsession with health, as many other alternative forms of medicine were also popularized in Germany at the time. These tribal ideas of medicine and the influence of the tribal medicine man persona clearly possessed these doctors and had a huge effect on Germany then, with the extreme obsession of health and medicine characteristic of the regime. Himmler, the chief of concentration camps, and the SS also supported this. As Cater writes, Himmler's determination to exert some influence on academic medical appointments was nurtured by a twofold interest in medicine. He sympathized with naturopathic methods and hence was close to the ideals of Wagner's New German Healing. But beyond that, he saw the potential of applied medicine through experiments for his SS, especially after the beginning of the war, and increasingly by the way of the human material that his own camps could provide. The German people's allegiance to authority and ideology provided a collective healing relationship between the general population and members of the Nazi social elite, for whom the most overrepresented profession were doctors. This national tribal relationship removed self-responsibility for wrongdoing, thereby alleviating guilt or shame and placing every inferiority and deficiency onto other groups who were being viewed as disease objects, as the primitive cultural medical technique follows. The public is not much more advanced either and continues to expect miraculous cures from the doctor, and indeed we must rate those doctors wise, worldly wise in every sense, who know how to surround themselves with the aura of a medicine man. They have not only the biggest practices, but also get the best results. This is because, apart from the neuroses, countless physical illnesses are tainted and complicated with psychic material to an unsuspected degree. The medical exorcist betrays by his whole demeanor his full appreciation of that psychic component when he gives the patient the opportunity of fixing his faith firmly on the mysterious personality of the doctor. In this way, he wins the sick man's mind, which from then on helps him to restore his body to health. The cure works best when the doctor himself believes in his own formula, otherwise he may be overcome by scientific doubt and so lose the proper convincing tone. Carl Jung, who knew that primitive tribes had two kinds of leaders, one a medicine man and the other the chief, regarded Hitler as the medicine man of Nazi Germany. In 1938, Jung spoke of this connection between Hitler and medicine men. A medicine man was not strong in himself, but was strong by reason of the power which the people projected into him. Hitler belonged to the category of the truly mystic medicine man. He is the loudspeaker, which magnifies the inaudible whispers of the German soul, until they can be heard by the German's conscious ear. Hitler's secret is twofold. First, that his unconscious has exceptional access to his consciousness, and second, that he allows himself to be moved by it. He is like a man who listens intently to a stream of suggestions in a whispered voice from a mysterious source, and then acts upon them. The true leader is always led. Germany was struck by terrible socio-economic conditions and guilt from the First World War. Chaos ran amok towards the ensuing build-up of Hitler's Third Reich. Mental illnesses, particularly psychosis, ran rampaging through Germany at the time, a state characterized by materialism, hedonism, brutality, and manipulative labor. Towards the lead-up of Nazi Germany, nothing but materialism was preached by the highest intellectual authorities. The churches were evidently unable to cope with this new situation. They could do nothing but protest, and that did not help very much. Thus, the avalanche rolled on in Germany and produced its leader, who was elected as a tool to complete the ruin of the nation. But what was his original intention? He dreamed of a new order. We should be badly mistaken if we assumed that he did not really intend to create an international order of some kind. On the contrary, deep down in his being, he was motivated by the forces of order which became operative in him the moment desirousness and greed had taken complete possession of his conscious mind. Hitler was the exponent of a new order, and that is the real reason why practically every German fell for him. The Germans wanted order, but they made the fatal mistake of choosing the principal victim of disorder and unchecked greed for their leader. Their individual attitude remained unchanged. Just as they were greedy for power, so they were greedy for order. The doctors of Nazi Germany, as members of the social elite, by and large fulfilled the primitive tribal role of the medicine men of their tribes, leading the Germans collectively into further ruin by satisfying the dark desires of the German soul, validating the resentments of the German people, promoting Nazi ideology, and removing the inferiorities of the hysterical German people by placing all the bad onto other groups such as Jews, who they regarded as greedy and diseased. The bad diseased other functioned as the medicine man's typical disease object removal technique. By pointing to and removing infectious others through euthanasia, segregation, or extermination, the vices and psychological diseases of the Germans would vanish. It was not Jews but Nazi Germans who were really the greedy and psychologically diseased. The Germans simply needed a vessel to place all their own vices onto, so they could feel as though those vices were removed in themselves. Barbarous and malevolent acts concerned with removing disorder and disease under the guise of health gave the German people a good conscience to commit them. One of the lessons we learn from Nietzsche is that morally anything, no matter how evil it is, can be done as long as it is done with a good conscience. This prevents any conscious reflection, as when one is committing evil, it is easier to repress or be ignorant of it. That way, you avoid any painful realization that the problem resided in you and your own vices. Mircea Eliade makes a distinction between medicine men and shamans, with shamans taking a distinctly more skilled psychological approach than the typical tricks of medicine men. The shaman, according to Eliade, found in primitive tribes globally throughout history, is supposed to have greater awareness of his own unconscious and soul, allowing him to create by himself truly unique methods of healing. The shaman also has a keener intuition and greater access to the collective soul or group identity of the tribe, allowing the shaman to figure out the needs, illnesses, and suffering of himself and other people. He is believed to cure like all doctors and to perform miracles of the fakir type, but beyond this he is a psychopomp, and he may also be a priest, mystic, and poet. Hitler fit many of the characteristics of the shaman. He was a creative person, a painter, a writer, and invented by and large Nazi ideology. He also regarded himself as Germany's religious leader. Through me, the evangelical Protestant church could become the established church, and after all, he waged war against a religion, Judaism. My feeling as a Christian points me to my Lord and Saviour as a fighter. It points me to the man who once, in loneliness, surrounded only by a few followers, recognized these Jews for what they were and summoned men to fight against them, and who, God's truth, was greatest not as a sufferer, but as a fighter. In boundless love as a Christian and as a man, I read through the passage which tells us how the Lord at last rose in his might and seized the scourge to drive out of the temple the brood of vipers and adders. How terrific was his fight against the Jewish poison. Today, after 2,000 years, with deepest emotion, I recognize more profoundly than ever before the fact that it was for this that he had to shed his blood upon the cross. Hitler truly was the leading medicine man and shaman of Nazi Germany. Some shamans are indeed evil. It is the shaman's confrontation with evil that often gives them their power. Indeed, what is characteristic of the shaman is the mastery of spirits or demons, which we might better understand in modern day as particular instincts, drives, or subpersonalities. The primitive role of the medicine man's confrontation of spirits and demons evolved into a technique in Christianity to that of exorcists, priests who removed evil spirits and demons. Similarly, in Islam, jinns are said to be good or evil ghosts and spirits that possess people and also require specialist exorcism. As Ellen Berger writes, exorcism is the exact counterpart of possession and a well-structured type of psychotherapy. Its basic characteristics are the following. The exorcist does not, ordinarily, speak in his own name, but in the name of a higher being. He must have absolute confidence in this higher being and in his own powers, as well as in the reality of the possession and of the possessing spirit. Not infrequently does the exorcist meet with defeat. Moreover, he is in danger himself of becoming infested with the very spirit he has just expelled from the patient. The shaman or medicine man's mastery and familiarity over these powers allow them to find out the cure or ailment of their patients, or, in modern-day psychotherapeutic terms, find out which instinct or part of a person's personality is pathologically active. For instance, somebody who is a nymphomaniac. There is something of the trickster in the character of the shaman and medicine man, for he, too, often plays malicious jokes on people, only to fall victim in his turn to the vengeance of those whom he has injured. For this reason, his profession sometimes puts him in peril of his life. Besides that, the shamanistic techniques in themselves often cause the medicine man a good deal of discomfort, if not actual pain. At all events, the making of a medicine man involves, in many parts of the world, so much agony of body and soul that permanent psychic injuries may result. His approximation to the Saviour is an obvious consequence of this, in confirmation of the mythological truth that the wounded wounder is the agent of healing, and that the sufferer takes away suffering. Hitler was of course viewed as the saviour of his people, as were other members of the Nazi social elites, including doctors. Hitler endured a great deal of suffering, having been wounded twice in World War I during his time as a soldier, and having many of his friends killed or wounded. Undoubtedly a condition shared by many of the German people, and so he grew to understand the resentment Germans largely had. Along with the terrible, chaotic socio-economic conditions of the time, the German people were susceptible to demanding a saviour who would rid them of their feelings of inferiority, take up all the responsibility for their failures, and validate their resentments. It is clear that Hitler eventually was possessed, as was the German people, by a kind of spirit or demon, which we can also term in modern day as the subpersonality of a person enacting a particular ideology, where a person acts as nothing but the mouthpiece for a particular ism, whether it be communism, Nazism, feminism, capitalism, environmentalism, and so on. In Nazism, we find a demon of resentment, inferiority, hysteria, and megalomania. When a whole nation is possessed by the demon of Nazism, it is difficult to remain clean oneself. It is such a demon to an extent that it even calls forth the sterilization and cleaning of every other person except itself. The priest, the doctor, or the medicine man or shaman is most at risk of being possessed by evil, as they are constantly confronted with inferiority, illness, and death of their patients and their psychology. This provides doctors terrible temptations due to the saintly and authoritative role many doctors believe they have, and the necessity in which their patients must believe in their authority and cures. However, the more you believe you are saintly, the more you will fail to realize where you are going wrong, and this led doctors in Nazi Germany to commit the most evil as a profession overall, whilst maintaining a good conscience. You see, the doctor's profession is not so provocative as a clergyman's. You can imagine all sorts of things about a doctor, and it is true that many doctors are very peculiar people. If you know the history of their profession, you realize that all sorts of people are in it, while for the clergy, it is far more critical. Our Swiss poet Gottfried Keller once said that there are those who are below God, and then there are the others who are above him. Those are the children of Satan, wolves in sheep's clothing, because they use the relationship to God as a personal title and know everything about God. They compensate by a pious attitude for their moral inferiority. But the others really are saints by vocation. This is also true of doctors. One finds most decent characters and most indecent characters, but when a profession is based upon such particular qualities as the vocation of the priest or the parson must be, then things come to a head, and the pairs of opposites are badly split. It is a tremendous thing for a man to assume that he is a priest and carry that psychological role. That is exceedingly provocative to the unconscious. Such people are liable to be subjected to the worst temptations. Therefore, the worst dreams are those of the saints. As we were saying last week, they are most assailed by the devil because they most provoke the devil, by the conscious assumption or by the fact that they are really decent, saintly people. They are a provocation to all the black powers, and of course they have to pay the price for their saintliness. So it is, doctors are most assailed by temptations to do bad because they are most put in the position of doing good. As nobody can be wholly good, doctors are in danger of being most unaware of bad they can do, because they are most unconscious of the bad they can do. According to Jung, when a person believes they are too good, the unconscious compensates in its opposite by temptations to do evil. This also explains how Nazi doctors in particular were able to do so much evil whilst believing they were doing good, making them, as a profession, commit the most evil of any other. The role doctors played in Nazi Germany was a case study on how ancient primitive medical techniques can be exaggerated on a massive scale, where a modern civilization regresses in large into the psychology of a primitive barbaric culture. The doctor's role as medicine men and their egotistical authority over the manipulation of life and death was exaggerated to such an extent that Nazi Germany's doctors believed that with their social authority they could bring complete health and removal of suffering to the German people. Doctors by and large played the psychological role of the medicine men of Nazi Germany and fulfilled their tribal role by removing the hysteria and psychological diseases of the Germans and placing them onto other groups such as Jews, who they regarded as infectious vermin. Medical experimentation and euthanasia was done in mass in the name of disease removal and German health. Excessively proud of their social prestige and authority, doctors helped lead the German people collectively, validating their resentments, and ushered in a new Reich of greed and order. Their megalomania ran so high in regard to their medical authority that they committed the evilest acts with a good conscience and doomed the medical profession with a stain that will, hopefully, never be cleansed, so that it may never be forgotten what can be committed under the guise of health, removal of suffering, and medical experimentation. However, an analysis of doctors under Hitler could not be complete without also examining the medical institutions and structural changes in Nazi Germany at the time and in comparison to that of modern day. Thank you for watching. In order to keep making videos, we need your support. You can support us and get exclusive content at Patreon and Locals. If you haven't already, Check out our Rumble and Twitter page too.